Part 79. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 793. Lord, I will never forgive you. The Pope just repeated this sentence. This sentence is the safest and most stable, a bit like serving the people. Compared with the black convenience store owner that Subai saw in the story world of Loop Forest and the devil in the painting that he saw in the story world of Mr. Zombie, this Pope's height is actually about the same as those two people. But his choice was like an ostrich, digging a hole, burying his head in it, and kept saying to himself, nothing happened and I don't know anything. This is a bit like Wang Jinggui's puppet government. In fact, most of the senior officials in this government knew that they were doing the things of traitors and traitors, but they told themselves and outsiders over and over again, I am taking a curve. Save the country. Actually, I have always had a question. The man was like an arrogant beast, taunting the Pope desperately. Why do you think, the Lord you know, is the one above your head? Where is the real Lord? If the Lord does not exist, why are you, a traitor, locked up here? The Pope retorted, you are now receiving punishment from the Lord. This is the best proof. In that case, why will my descendant appear? The man asked. It's so pitiful, so ridiculous, and so ignorant. You don't even have the courage to look up at the sky, not as good as me, the person in the cage. He, ha ha ha, I don't believe it. I don't believe that coward Alexander will be you now, the Lord above your head. Even the Eastern Dragon, I think he is better than Alexander, is more qualified. What's the point of saying this now? The Pope's old face has very clear age spots, but his eyes are shining with clear light. He is not a confused person, on the contrary, he is very shrewd. In the Pope's view, the real confused person should be it was the cardinal who had just committed suicide. He wanted to get the real information and finally had to commit suicide to end himself. Heard the truth in the morning and died in the evening. It looks beautiful and gorgeous. This, according to the Pope, is real folly. Meaning, then what is the meaning of your life? At least, the current situation is that no matter what kind of scene is above the sky, your descendant will definitely die. He comes to you, doesn't he just want to get more benefits from you, but he has basically entered I can't come here, I can't come to you. Just wait. After this incident is over, I will pray to the Lord again and ask him to give you the power of purification to completely annihilate you. When the Pope spoke of the Lord, his face was sincere and solemn. If I die, then what's the point of the existence of this world? The man paused and continued. I don't believe you haven't guessed, your holy see, your world, the meaning of existence, is actually to keep me, but there is one more thing. I don't think my successor will die, even if he can't come here, can't see me, he can get my inheritance. I can't possibly let him die like this. Haha, try it. The Pope was very confident, because the Holy See had actually noticed that person when he first appeared half a year ago, and this time, the other person's reappearance was more high profile and direct, thus giving the Holy See enough time to make arrangements. Okay, try. The man closed his eyes. The verbal exchange between the two sides ended, but what really decided the outcome was the serious fighting outside. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. 30 Templar knights lined up in a row, charging at Subai in an endless manner. At first, Subai was captured alive in this way, because Subai at that time facing this kind of phalanx, I felt really powerless and felt what oppression and despair meant. However, this time, Subai did not intend to make the same mistake again. The attack horn of the Templar Knights was actually the signal for Subai to launch an attack. Facing the 30 Templar Knights in front of him, Subai leaned out with all his strength and punched out, hitting the Templar Knight in front of him. Puff. Boom. Boom. A series of explosive sounds were heard. The 30 Templar Knights formed one body after setting up the formation. However, in front of Sudbai's punch, even the power of the punch was divided into 30 parts and fell on 30 people. Body, but it is still somewhat unbearable for them as individuals. In the first round of the confrontation, 15 of the 30 Templars were killed, and the remaining 15 were all seriously injured and fell off their horses. The man in platinum armor who was commanding from the rear pulled out the long sword in his hand and let out a soft drink in his throat. For a moment, the original pattern of 30 Templar Knights in a square formation instantly changed and turned into 90 saints. The Palace Knights formed a phalanx, several phalanxes in total, and began a new round of squeezing towards Sudbai. Beside the Platinum Commander, 2 cardinals began to chant spells separately. In the air, a layer of space barrier had been silently established, while deep in the ground, earth dragons were galloping and roaring. Even though they had just destroyed 30 Templar Knights, these 3 commanders still did not panic at all. This is the Vatican, this is the headquarters of the Holy See, and they have absolute confidence to keep outsiders here forever. That's it, the foundation. The phalanx composed of 90 Templar Knights was enough to withstand Sudbai's attack, and their offensive had to make Sudbai cautious. This is a superposition formation, which can even be called a bug, just like a piece of paper folded 30 times is higher than Mount Everest. In the battle group, continuous roars continued to be heard. Sudbai was fighting happily, while the Templar Knights in the phalanx were in a relatively torturous situation. They had to endure the pain and injuries from Sudbai's power again and again, but their offensive seemed to be difficult to really cause harm to Sudbai. Gujan's turn brought a new transformation to Sudbai's physical body. In this confrontation, the physical body's advantages were more vividly demonstrated. If this stalemate continues, Sudbai will probably have the last laugh, because the formation of the Templar Knights requires a price. When both sides are exhausted to a certain extent, the Templar Knights will not be able to continue to set up the formation. After being broken into individuals, the Templar Knights would be killed even if they faced the seriously injured Sudbai. The figure of the commander wearing platinum armor disappeared on the spot. The 2 cardinals understood it. For a moment, when Sudbai was forcibly expelled to the sky by 2 phalanxes of Templar Knights, the surrounding space suddenly became tighter, and at the same time, it also carried twisted destructive power, it's like people are squeezing towels. Sudbai stretched out his arms and used his own physical strength to forcefully push away the squeezing space around him. Below, 2 earth dragons formed by condensed earth essence broke out of the ground and rushed towards Sudbai. Sudbai stamped his feet down, and the 2 earth dragons collapsed immediately. However, the earth essence did not dissipate, but attached to Sudbai's body, producing a magical effect similar to restraint. A breeze blew, and the Platinum Knight's sword had arrived. At this time, Sudbai was suppressed by the forces from heaven and earth. However, even in this situation, Sudbai had no way to escape. A big reason why he chose the most head-on way to fight was actually to truly test his ability to fight purely with physical bodies. Therefore, even if Sudbai now's situation is not very good, but he also has enough means to break it. So much so. Get away. After all, he did not go deep into the Vatican and was not trapped by the magic weapons and formations in the Vatican. Therefore, Sudbai had actually left enough escape routes for himself. As a high-level audience, he did not want to be obsessed with you. When trying to escape, it's really hard to catch and kill him. However, when Sudbai was about to pull away, a cold and familiar voice came from behind Sudbai. If you try to run away, you'll disappoint me. This voice is very familiar and comes from his own bloodline. At the same time, a figure of a shackled man appeared behind Sudbai. The man opened his arms and roared to the sky. The clanging sound of the shackles could be heard continuously, and a sharp aura was directly injected into Sudbai's body. A long time ago, Sudbai summoned this phantom to help him fight. However, as his strength improved, the phantom's blessing and increase were no longer necessary. But this time, the phantom's blessing gave Sudbai a hearty feeling. And this may be Sudbai's real purpose of wanting to enter the story world again. Boom! Sudbai pushed down hard with his arms, and the restraints of the space collapsed. Then, Sudbai's feet shook violently, and the essence of the earth completely dissipated. The two cardinals below shook their bodies and fell to their knees. On the ground, blood was flowing. The Platinum Knight's sharp sword still penetrated Sudbai's body, but the sword only penetrated less than 1/3 of Sudbai's body. However, no matter how hard he exerted force, he could no longer push forward. Sudbai's muscles clamped the sharp sword, and at the same time he stretched out his hand to lift the opponent's helmet, revealing a beautiful face. Cinderella. Do my legs look good? Cinderella asked, but at the same time, her body began to release a dazzling white light, and the sacred power began to rise, and the sharp sword clamped by Sudbai's muscles also at this point it started to get hot. But it's a pity. Sudbai is not Zhangwuji at the top of the light. When Sisters Hiruo pierced his body with the heavenly sword, he smiled generously and took out the heavenly sword and handed it back to the other party. The next second, Cinderella, who had not yet completed the explosion of holy light, made a crisp sound. Sudbai grabbed the opponent's head with one hand and twisted it 360 degrees, directly breaking off the head and torso. The hot blood containing the breath of holy light spilled down. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 794. Next to the stream, Sudbai sat with his bare feet. The stream kept washing his body, and most of the blood stains on his body were washed away. The fierce battle in the morning, for Sudbai, was really a good fight. He was enjoying himself heartily, but he also had some injuries on his body. Fortunately, Gu Zheng's reshaped body managed to block most of the attacks as much as possible. However, the fatigue caused by excessive consumption was not enough. Way to avoid it? On a rock protruding out of the water in the creek, there was a head. Because Cinderella's head was forcibly broken off by Sudbai in the most brutal way, the facial expression of the head was very distorted. Sudbai looked at the heads beside him while rinsing his body, feeling quite contented. After a while, the expression of the head changed, and the twisted position began to smooth out. In the story, the reason why Cinderella was able to attract the prince's attention was that in addition to the two factors of glass slippers and foot fetish, Cinderella herself also had a beautiful woman with good looks as the basic qualification to attract a prince. Haven't seen you for a long time. Sudbai said hello to the head. Considering Sudbai's current level of strength, it is indeed not difficult to judge whether the head in front of him is still active. Cinderella's face did not face the resentment of the enemy who had just broken her head. Instead, she looked very calm. She just said calmly, "It's only been half a year, but I don't even recognize you anymore." Hearing Cinderella's words, what Sudbai thought of was the vampire prince. In fact, for Sudbai himself, the thing that has changed the most is actually his own strength. As for the other aspects, the changes may not really matter. You are big, but your strength is the first thing that others notice about you. Similar to how the vampire prince turned from a confident young man in middle school to a slovenly Philistine uncle, this made Sudbai even more embarrassed. You don't seem to be curious at all about why I appeared in the Holy See. Seeing that Sudbai ignored her, Cinderella had no choice but to continue asking. Why you appear in the Holy See? It doesn't make sense to me. Sudbai smiled. Indeed, it doesn't make sense. He is not from this world, and his purpose of entering this world has basically been achieved. As for what is here, young Master Su really doesn't have the time to pay attention to secrets and suspense. Actually, this is not my true body. Cinderella continued, my true body is in the holy tomb of the Holy See. In that cemetery, most of the Holy See's death is approaching for thousands of years. A strong person who closes himself off. Hearing this, Subai was stunned for a moment, then nodded thoughtfully, reached into the stream casually, and a small fish was caught. It's a little too small, Subai said to himself. This small fish is not satisfying to eat grilled, and it is difficult to really taste it when boiled into soup without ingredients. Subai's second purpose of entering the story world of Cinderella is actually to eat and drink. Therefore, he is very particular about every meal he eats and is willing to put more thought into it. After all, after this story world ends, I will return to the place of enlightenment. But this move had another meaning in Cinderella's eyes. She said, "Yes, you are actually just a little fish. The group of heretics who suddenly entered here half a year ago followed you one by one. The same little fish." Oh. Subai was unmoved, but soon, his figure disappeared from the place. When he returned to the original position, there was a black rabbit in his hand. This rabbit was quite fat and big, enough to eat. In fact, Subai already knew what Cinderella said, but it was still not as important as his own lunch. But obviously, Cinderella didn't think so. She kept chattering in Subai's ears like a radio. Subai doesn't feel bored either. In fact, most modern people in the real world have the habit of putting food in front of them and choosing a video or program to watch while eating. Many people even choose a video program to eat while eating. I encountered difficulty in choosing, which resulted in the food being cold and the program not being selected yet. Subai now thought that Cinderella was just a radio, creating an atmosphere suitable for dinner. The Lord allows you to appear, the Lord allows you to be discovered by us, the Lord allows me to incarnate as a mortal, waiting for your choice. This is a game of the Lord, and it is also a game that we in the Vatican participate in. You are very mysterious, you are very pretentious, you even look at the world with disdain, but in fact you are just pawns being played, and I, and the Holy See behind me, are also participants in this game. Your pride, everything about you, in our opinion, is so ridiculous and ignorant. Cinderella's voice is getting louder and louder. In fact, when your voice gets louder, the person you are persuading will slowly become you. You need to use a louder volume to persuade yourself, because I have begun to have doubts about what I insist on. Subai is handling the rabbit by the stream. His technique is very gentle, but under this gentle technique, the rabbit is being cleaned very clean. This is a complete contrast. When you just look at people, it feels like this young man is playing the piano, with soft and warm lines. But if you look at it as a whole, plus the rabbit being cleaned, you will feel that this man is a cold-blooded butcher. No, it may even be that the other person is actually, treat killing and torture as a kind of life, even an art. The fire was lit, and the fish and rabbits were roasted on the fire. There were no condiments. Subai actually didn't have high expectations for them, but compared to the life in the place of enlightenment, having fresh meat to eat was already considered a good thing. Very nice enjoyment. At this time, Subai finally noticed that after talking for so long, only one head was left, and he could still continue to output words for such a long time. Subai suddenly felt that Cinderella was not easy, so he decided to speak. Road. You in the Vatican obviously have the power to keep me, why don't you keep me and kill me? After receiving Subai's response, Cinderella felt moved, and immediately said, that's because you are just a small fish, and our goal is a big fish. It doesn't matter whether you die or not. It doesn't matter whether you stay or not, it's meaningless, you go and leave with that guy's inheritance and power, then our Holy See can completely solve the trouble that has been left for thousands of years. Because we can't kill that person at all, no matter what method we use, we can't kill him. But this time, he instills his power into your body, and he is destroying his own foundation. So, from his death, it's no longer far away. Subai nodded, indicating that he understood, then smiled, and said, actually, he was going to die. But without you, he can't die. Half a year ago, When our group of people appeared in this world, you were already making preparations, right? Subai said while flipping the roasted rabbit. Yes, because we firmly believe that there will definitely be one of his descendants among you. Therefore, the Holy See only sent me to wake up and transform into multiple Cinderellas to join this game. However, the true power of the Holy See has not moved at all. We will give you space, we will give you time, and we will give you sufficient conditions to let that guy choose his successor. It sounds like it's not easy, Subai sighed. Everything is for the Lord. Subai stretched out his hand and tore off a piece of rabbit meat. It was not very cooked, but Subai still chewed it and swallowed it. Compared with undercooked rabbit meat, it was even more difficult to swallow. Subai didn't know how much he had eaten. Actually, there is a counter-logic here. Oh, it's not counter-logic. Maybe it's because we stand in different positions, so we think in different directions. Let's put it this way, I'm a small fish, and the one in the cage is the big fish. Then, what do you belong to? A loyal believer in the Lord? You have already said that the man has been imprisoned in the Vatican prison for more than 1,000 years, and you have not been able to kill him. So, what position did you hold before your Lord? The Lord is selfless, almighty, and great. This sentence is very similar to our Eastern saying, heaven and earth are unkind and treat all things as rotten dogs. In fact, if you think about it from another angle, is your use to your Lord just to watch over the person in prison? It is very possible that the Lord does not care how many religions you have preached in this world, nor how many more believers he has gained. He created you just to send himself to you as a person to be taken into custody. Most likely, this is the true meaning of your world's existence. I am a small fish, and the big fish gave me something to save his life. If he is weak, he will be killed by you. Then, once he is killed, what use will the Lord have for you? Subai said easily while rolling the rabbit. The rabbit had a lot of fat and it had begun to drip. Let me tell you one more thing. I really know a lot more about your so-called Lord than you do. I have experienced his bad taste and his ruthlessness many times. Cinderella was stunned. He tore off a piece of rabbit meat again. It tasted good. Although no condiments were added, the gamey taste still came out. Subai felt very satisfied. This is impossible. We are believers in the Lord and we are loyal to. Believe me, that guy really doesn't need any followers, he just wants a story. Once that guy dies, haha, there is a high probability that your world will also be ended. Do you think I will believe what you say? Cinderella asked, staring at Subai. As you wish. Subai tore off a piece of rabbit meat and brought it to Cinderella's mouth. Would you like to eat it? Cinderella. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 795. A meal, a small fish, and a big black rabbit, nothing was wasted. Subai put them all into his mouth. Then at night, Subai put Cinderella's head next to him and slept. Anyway, the Vatican, the person over there is probably busy executing the person in the prison, and has no time to distract himself from chasing him. Furthermore, unless the Vatican dares to send out 3 or more high-level listeners to hunt him, defeating him can be done, I think. It is basically impossible to actually kill yourself. With Subai's current strength combined with Gu Zheng's body, it is indeed too difficult to kill. The next morning, Subai woke up and stretched first, then walked to the stream and washed his face. In fact, entering this story world, in addition to eating is one aspect of enjoyment, sleeping is also another aspect of enjoyment. After all, there will be no gurgling streams around you when you sleep in the place of enlightenment, no chirping of insects, and no night breeze with a slightly salty smell in the forest. When Subai washed his face, he saw Cinderella looking at him with her eyes open. Subai smiled, with a thoughtful look on his face. Are you thinking about how to deal with me? Or, are you thinking about how to use me? After that time I had multiple clones, you are the one with the most and the least limit among these people. Of course, what Cinderella was talking about was that Subai had asked her to practice the techniques of sex alone in order for him to gain the favor of the prince. But Cinderella actually obeyed at that time. She integrated herself into the Lord's will. She did whatever the Lord asked her to do without any hesitation or rejection. It was quite interesting to play this way on the radio. Maybe, in the eyes of the broadcast, the believers in this world are also part of its bad taste and a means to enhance the story. After all, Cinderella is equivalent to the status of a saint in the Holy See, but she does not hesitate to carry out the will of the Lord. Disrespect yourself to this extent. Subai frowned and said seriously, I was just thinking about what to eat this morning. One meal is one less meal, so Subai cherishes it especially. In the morning, Subai found some wild fruits in the forest to satisfy his hunger. The taste was not very good, mostly sour, but it was still a taste. When Cinderella discovered that Subai had brought her to Naples, she was surprised and said, You don't want to live anymore. I firmly believe that most of the forces in the Holy See are arranging a grand bonfire ceremony, so even though Naples is very close to the Vatican, I still choose to come here. I don't have much time. Subai estimated that he would probably be broadcast back to the real world tonight. Therefore, he felt that he should find a city to reward his stomach. As for the man who was imprisoned in prison, Subai had no intention of rescuing him and knew that he could not save him. He was imprisoned there and had obviously transcended the role of NPC in this story world. He might even have the intention of broadcasting. In short, in this case, no matter how rashly he takes action, it makes no sense. The city of Naples is full of wanted portraits of Subai, but the power of the church in the city has been weakened a lot because of this. The church has imprisoned the man for thousands of years. This time we finally have the opportunity to completely end this trouble. Naturally, we will mobilize the people nearby. All power has been mobilized to ensure absolute safety. Because of this, Subai went directly into a relatively high-end restaurant and arrested the boss, and then asked the boss to call out dishes to the waiters outside to entertain his friends. It's really easy when your goal is simply to have a meal. And when Subai was sitting at the dinner table and feasting, Cinderella looked a little unbelievable when the human head was placed on the table. She couldn't believe that Subai really came here just for a meal. The boss stood at the table tremblingly, not daring to make the slightest move. After drinking and eating, Subai picked up a new towel and wiped his mouth. Next, he waited for the broadcast to be immediately transported back to the place of enlightenment. He was also satisfied. Whether it was the desire for food or the strengthening of the shadow behind him, Subai returned to the story world of Cinderella this time. Even though the process was somewhat tortuous, the final goal was achieved, and there was really no regrets. However, when Subai just put down the towel in his hand, an old man appeared behind him. Cinderella saw the old man, her mouth opened slightly, and she seemed very surprised, but she immediately closed her eyes slightly, with a look of respect and piety on her face. If she had a body at this time, she should be half bowing. Are you eating well? The old man asked very kindly, as if he was really caring about whether his junior was eating well. Subai turned sideways, looked at the old man standing behind him, licked his lips and said, Are you the Pope? Isn't it surprising that an old guy who was supposed to be holding a bonfire ceremony in the Vatican is now here? The Pope slowly walked to the chair next to Subai and sat down. Don't tell me there are a large number of Templars and Cardinals around here, Subai asked with a shrug. No, don't worry about this. I'm the only one here. The Pope was very sincere. And although my power alone can defeat you, I can't kill you. You should know this. Then what are you doing here? Subai asked curiously. Anyway, judging by the time, it was almost time for him to be teleported back. Therefore, even if the Pope was cheating, Subai felt that he could hold on for a while longer and wait for the teleportation. The ability is still there. It's nothing important. I just want to come and talk to you. Before you leave the Pope's side and looked at Cinderella again. Can you let her leave here first? She stays here. Listen. If something happens, it will harm her instead. I have no intention of taking action against you, so I hope you can give me this face. Besides, after all, she has been with you for such a long time. Subai reached out and grabbed Cinderella's head, and then threw it directly out of the window. Frightened screams immediately came from the street outside. Anyone who suddenly saw a head falling in front of him while shopping would probably be like this. A reaction. The Pope was slightly stunned, but nodded with a smile. Thanks. Subai picked up the wine glass in front of him and took a sip. For some reason, at this moment, Subai thought of the black convenience store owner. He and Sophia completed that story world in an inexplicable way. The black convenience store owner knew his identity, so he deliberately disgusted the broadcast, took the initiative not to be the final boss, and allowed Subai and others to leave safely to reduce the storyline of the broadcast. But what the Pope did didn't seem to be as resolute as a black convenience store owner. Some words, if told to others, will hurt him, so even the closest people can't tell him, which is a kind of sadness, especially when you are bearing the biggest lies and pressure about the world but when there is no one to talk to. It does sound aggrieved, Subai agreed. Until now, Subai didn't know what kind of medicine the Pope was selling in his gourd. Keeping him under custody is the mission given to us by the Lord, the Pope continued. At this time, Subai could naturally tell that the Lord in the Pope's mouth did not really refer to God. We will ensure that we complete the mission given by the Lord, because it is the Lord who gives our world light, because it is the Lord who allows us to survive and multiply, and because it is the Lord who gives us civilization, wisdom, and we had the thinking that allowed us to have everything we have now. The Pope's speech was full of affection. Subai knocked on the table lightly and said, I think you can jump right in. Subai did not continue talking, because he understood that the Pope could not speak directly. Even if he found someone who was qualified to talk to him, the Pope could not directly express the frustration in his heart, otherwise, he would die. But fortunately, as a listener, Subai was able to understand the deeper meaning of the words of the highest NPC in this story world. The Pope slowly stood up and held his hands for a moment. The window of the room was opened and the fresh air began to flow. The Pope closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and said, According to Cinderella's report to me, you seem to be nostalgic for this world. Do you have a sense of reluctance and nostalgia for the food, flowers, plants, and trees of this world? Yes, Subai replied. Well, you, an outsider, are nostalgic for this world, let alone me. A look of emotion appeared on the Pope's face. I was born in this world, I grew up in this world, and I love this world. Subai knew clearly that the Pope was not expressing emotion or preaching. But this world. Subai hesitated and organized his words, but you are still ready to kill him. It's ridiculous, isn't it? The Pope said, the people we have detained, the people who have been detained for more than 1,000 years, the most serious problem of our Holy See for more than 1,000 years, are actually the fundamental meaning of this world's existence. He will also take pity on the key to taking a closer look at our world. You have no choice. Yes, we have no choice. Once we deliberately do not kill him and continue to let him be detained in the Vatican, then the Lord will think that we loyal believers have deserted him, and then the Lord will abandon us. But there is no choice to kill him, Subai said. The Pope held his hands on the windowsill and smiled to himself. So, tomorrow, together with all the cardinals in the Vatican, I will pray to the Lord in a self-sacrificing way, hoping that the Lord will come down and annihilate the sinners with divine fire. In that case, all those who are qualified to approach the Lord and understand Him will no longer exist. Even if this leads to the collapse of the power of the Holy See, even if it leads to the re-emergence of the dark camp, even if it leads to the human beings in this world suffering from war, darkness, plague, etc. again. But at least, this world can be saved. In this world, there are werewolves, vampires, wizards, humans, countries, knights, flowers, trees, mountains and rivers. This world can still be favored by the Lord again, because it is still interesting. Subai was shocked. He finally understood what the Pope was going to do. The Pope was going to bury all the people in the Holy See, that is, in this world, who were qualified to see clearly the true identity of the Lord, that is, to see clearly the nature of this story world. The Pope wants to leave a colorful story world here. He hopes that the broadcast will not directly destroy it, but keep it and continue to use it in a certain story world in the future. You are great. This time Subai used the honorific title. Because I have no choice. The Pope turned around and looked at Subai. Do you have a choice? Growing up, I really didn't have many opportunities to choose by myself. I hope that one day, I can make my own choices. But unfortunately, maybe my choice is not what you want me to make. Choice. You misunderstood. I have no complaints or dissatisfaction with the Lord. He created this world, created me, and created everything that I think is wonderful. I believe in it, I respect it, I love it. This is my life. Whether life or death. A belief that will never change. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 796. There was a kind of silence in the room. The restaurant owner, who had been threatened by Subai, was enveloped in a ray of holy light and fell into a sweet sleep when the Pope appeared. Subai, on the other hand, because after hearing the Pope's choice it feels a little strange. Maybe it was because he had been in the audience circle for a long time. Suddenly faced with this situation, Subai really didn't know what to say. Praise his greatness. Subai knew that the other party did not need his praise at all. As for talking about other things, it seems to have a superficial meaning. After all, he and the Pope were two strangers who met for the first time. There was a look of satisfaction on the Pope's face. As an old man whose lifespan had already passed 100 years ago, it seemed that only today could he truly express his innermost thoughts freely. For this world, the audience is a special group, but in fact, the entry of the audience actually marks that the world has been given a label, and the meaning of the label is not much different from the stage of a stage play. This is a kind of entanglement and a kind of contradiction, but God has not given the creatures in this world any chance to choose. The silence between the two people continued again. Finally, when both sides felt that this meaningless situation should end, the Pope lowered his head and adjusted his robe. He did not wear the gorgeous clothes that the Pope wears when attending grand events, and did not wear the mitre on his head that symbolized the absolute power of the Holy See. He was now as simple as a country farmer. In his eyes, he only saw the crops in his own home. As the highest-ranking being in this world, he actually does not enjoy much of the absolute power to call the wind and rain as the world's ruler, nor does he indulge in selfless pursuits. On the one hand, it is the hometown where he was born and raised, and on the other hand, it is the inexorable power of God. As the supreme master of speculation, all living beings can live their lives in a daze, thinking about how to solve tomorrow's lunch, while the Pope needs to bear too much psychological torture and pain. The black convenience store owner chose to fight willfully, and did not hesitate to deliberately let go of the broadcast to reduce the storytelling he was pursuing. The devil in the painting chose to fly into the sky and was obliterated in the roar of resistance. Compared with these two, the Pope's choice is actually more difficult. He is fully qualified to be free and easy of his own. Just like a bloody corpse at the end of his life, all he thinks about in the last days of his life is how to make a living. He died in a brilliant way, but the Pope chose a kind of perseverance, and the purpose of perseverance was not to preserve himself. In fact, in order to persevere, he had to sacrifice himself first. "When will the ceremony be held?" Sudbai asked. "Tonight," the Pope replied. Sudbai remembered that in the memory picture, it seemed to be daytime, but at that time the sky was completely gloomy and dark clouds were rolling in. It seemed difficult to distinguish a clear point in time. But the Pope seemed to see something and added, "There is never night in the Vatican's Judgment Square. Are you willing to come and visit? If you can come and witness it, it will also be an honor for me and them who are about to be martyred. After all, in this world, there are many people who can understand and be able to. It seems that the only person who is qualified to stand by and watch the ceremony is you." The Pope sent out an invitation, but Sudbai shook his head without thinking much and said, "I do not have time." Although the Pope's previous words touched Sudbai a lot, Sudbai was not a so-called hot-blooded young man after all. Now that he and the Pope have been in the same room for so long, he has actually put himself into a possible crisis. He made a wrong choice, and Sudbai was not willing to continue to make more mistakes. The Pope didn't seem surprised by Sudbai's rejection. He gently bent down and gestured to Sudbai. "Thank you for listening. I very much hope that in the years to come, people like you will enter this world again. If there will be listeners entering this world in the future, it means that this story world has not been abandoned by broadcasting, but is still being used by broadcasting, which proves that it still exists. As long as it can continue to exist, the sacrifices of the Pope and his group of cardinals are worth it, at least, in their eyes, it is worth it. I agree with this. After all, I still have a few familiar people in this story world. Is it the Vampire Prince?" A smile appeared on His Majesty the Pope's face. "This may be the last thing I can do for you, and it can also be regarded as compensation for your time spent listening to this bad old man like me." As soon as he finished speaking, the Pope's body turned into a white light and disappeared directly. Obviously, the reason why he appeared in Naples was just to chat with Sudbai before being martyred, but what he really wanted to do was tonight's ceremony in Judgment Square, Vatican. The Pope's last words surprised Sudbai. After the Pope left, Sudbai stood by the window. Soon, a man wearing tattered clothes came into Sudbai's sight downstairs. Somewhat dazed and at a loss, he just walked forward mechanically. With this look, he turned out to be a beggar with a poor family. When the other party seemed to notice something and raised his head to look up, he found that there was no one at the window on the roof of the hotel. The man gently rubbed the back of his head, and then continued to walk forward numbly. He felt that he had too many illusions today. "Why don't you see him?" Cinderella's head floated back at some point. Fortunately, it was daytime, and fortunately it was Sudbai standing in front of her and not any other ordinary person. Otherwise, this scene would really scare people to death. Sudbai ignored Cinderella, nor did he face her nagging and analyze with her the connection between the master and the broadcast and the existence in the prison and the world as before. Since the old Pope was ready to be martyred, he had deliberately Cinderella was isolated, obviously not intending to let Cinderella participate in this martyrdom ceremony, so there was no need for Sudbai to deliberately harm others here. Facing Sudbai's silence, Cinderella seemed a little unable to adapt. She had just been thrown out by Sudbai like a ball, and now she came back again. She had too many doubts, such as the appearance of the Pope, such as the Pope. Regarding Sudbai's attitude, for example, why did the Holy See help Sudbai capture the vampire prince who was far away in the snow forest and use the teleportation circle to teleport to the city of Naples, but then released him directly? Sudbai looked at Cinderella. In fact, Sudbai was still thinking before. Cinderella seemed to know a lot of things. If the Pope really wanted to bring all the insiders to martyrdom, Cinderella should also be one of them. That's right. But now, Sudbai seems to understand a little bit. Cinderella's role in this story world is a bit similar to Shagu's role in The Legend of the Condor Heroes. She has good kung fu but is a bit silly. Subai believed that the cardinal who pretended to be a friend in prison appeared in front of him yesterday and was able to understand what he said to him. Then, that cardinal should appear on the list of martyrdom this time. Or even more extreme, the cardinal might have died yesterday. Cinderella first obeyed the Lord's command and transformed into a mortal to play the role of Cinderella, and she did not show any abnormality from beginning to end, and completed the task assigned to her by the Lord completely and meticulously. Perhaps, the Pope deliberately left her and kept her because he felt that the Lord might be more interested in Cinderella, who had weak understanding but was so rigid that she was stupid. If Cinderella was still alive, then this story world would undoubtedly become more exciting. A woman with a status comparable to that of a saint in the Vatican, but can do anything for the Lord. When the next broadcast wants to use the story world again, Cinderella will undoubtedly be a good starting point for the story. Although the Pope does not know the bad taste of radio broadcasts, he has a very clear understanding of the position of himself and the world he lives in to the Lord. This must be said to be a kind of tragedy. His Highness the Prince was marching in a daze. This is a big city. His Highness the Prince knew this very well, but he was in a dazed state now. From being captured in the snow forest to being exiled in the city, he still couldn't understanding what exactly happened. The ups and downs of life burst out in an instant, is indeed enough to make people feel a little lost. At this moment, the prince suddenly fell to the ground. He struggled to get up and shook his head, still a little confused. Subai's figure kept moving beside the prince, but the prince could not notice Subai beside him. The prince stumbled slowly to the west gate of Naples. The papal guards in the city consciously did not disturb him. Here, the Pope's instructions are absolutely supreme. Moreover, in the Pope's view, after tonight, the dark camp that has been suppressed for many years will rise again. There is actually no difference between having one more vampire prince and one less vampire prince. When the prince walked out of the west gate and reached the suburbs, Subai still didn't show up, because Subai didn't know what to say. Maybe it would be better for the Pope not to get the prince here. In Subai's impression, the prince should be a middle-aged and confident young man, but now, he can no longer see his former figure. If Subai helps him now or leaves something for him before leaving the story world, but instead pushes it further into the unfamiliar abyss. This point of view is selfish, because Subai looks at things completely from his own point of view, and does not think from the prince's point of view. His Royal Highness seemed to be tired from walking. He turned back with some doubts, looked behind him, and then walked forward blankly again. Perhaps, after the collective martyrdom of the top leaders of the Holy See tonight, the world will be turbulent again. If the prince is lucky enough, he will really have a chance to re-establish his own clan. It is very likely that at some future opportunity, several listeners who have just entered the world of this story will meet a crazy and middle-aged vampire king who holds a blind date banquet for his prince regardless of worldly standards. Choose someone with nice legs and feet to be your son's wife. What a deep love. Cinderella suddenly appeared next to Subai and sighed, "No wonder you weren't willing when I asked you to taste my skills. It turns out I don't have many friends." Subai sighed and said, "And often, people who used to be friends slowly start to become strangers." Cinderella was silent for a while, and then said to Subai sincerely, "I apologize for my previous joke." Subai laughed, reached out and pulled Cinderella's head in front of him, and asked, "You should be able to condense a new body now, right? Or, you can ask your true self to come over from the Vatican. I will be attending tonight's ceremony, which is an important day for the Vatican. You can ask the Pope. I believe the Pope will agree." Cinderella hesitated for a while, and then said, "Then, can I ask you, what is the purpose of letting my body come here? Aren't you sorry that I asked you to practice that technique but you never got the chance to use it? I should be leaving tonight, so I think we can seize the time and give it a try." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 797. Cinderella's head left, but Cinderella's true form did not come from the Vatican. She may have disdained a final lingering moment before Subai left, or she may have thought that tonight's ceremony in the Vatican's Judgment Square would be more interesting. It was important, and for this reason, she did not hesitate to suppress her great confusion and curiosity, because even if she asked the Pope or the other Red Archbishops to answer these questions, she would still not get the answer. On the wall of Naples, Subai was sitting alone against the wall, with 2 large cans of rum next to him. It was not that he was drinking to relieve his worries, because for Subai, there was nothing to worry about at this time. If it would be too petty to worry just because there will be no fresh food to eat when you are about to leave the story world and return to the place of enlightenment. He drank the wine one sip after another. To be honest, Subai didn't like the taste of the wine very much, but now his mouth was free, so he habitually mixed in some flavors to stimulate his taste buds. It seems that at this moment, his current state is similar to that of staying in the place of enlightenment. He raised his head and looked at the starry sky. The starry sky above the head is where human beings think heaven is, and where the Supreme Lord lives. Subai is also thinking about whether he can communicate with the Lord when he prays, or, the broadcast snapped. The empty wine jar was smashed by Subai on the city wall. He climbed up and looked to the north, which was the direction of the Vatican. At that location, it should be very grand and solemn at this time. Except for the Pope and Cardinals, the rest of the members of the Holy See should be rejoicing at this time. The devil who has been dragging down the Holy See for nearly 1,000 years will receive a judgment from God, and the Holy See can release more power to fight against the evil in the Holy See. The remaining forces of the dark camp in this world will be completely eradicated, and the glory of the Lord will eventually shine on every inch of this world. However, the development of reality will eventually disappoint these believers. When the Pope leads the cardinals to be martyred together, the structure of the Holy See that dominates all parties will directly collapse. Both the secular countries and the dark camp will be affected by the Holy See's influence. Get relief from stress. Subai even thought with a hint of joking that before long a dwarf from Corsica would take the initiative to take the crown from the Pope's hands and put it on his head. The evening breeze was slightly chilly, and slowly, it seemed to start raining. The cold raindrops fell on my face, which made the night even more depressing. The second bottle of rum was held in his hand. Subai took another sip, and under the city wall, a beautiful figure quietly appeared. Subai paused slightly while drinking, and then put the wine down. "I didn't expect you to drink alone here." The woman's voice was a little cold, and she who was standing at the foot of the city wall just now appeared next to Subai in the blink of an eye. "I thought you weren't coming." Subai smiled, picked up the wine and continued to drink. "I originally thought I wouldn't come." Cinderella was dressed in a white robe, which highlighted her noble temperament, which cannot be achieved by holding a high position for a long time. Subai continued to drink and said nothing. A white hand grabbed Subai's wine can, stopping Subai from continuing to drink. "Did you ask me to come here just to watch you drink?" Cinderella asked. "Do I really want you to serve me with your feet once?" Subai asked back. "I'm so confused." Cinderella's voice suddenly became louder. "None of you will tell me the answer. I'm the only one who's stupid." Boom. The wine jar immediately shattered, and the wine instantly turned into ice slag and fell down. Subai shrugged helplessly. "The only pleasure left to me is drinking. After a while, I won't even be able to drink anymore." "This is not a reason." Cinderella's hand subconsciously grasped Subai's collar. "Please tell me the answer, please tell me the answer." When he said it for the second time, Cinderella's aura suddenly rose, her hair fluttered, and her whole body exuded an icy aura. "Put your hands down." Subai didn't resist, but it was obvious that Subai didn't want this woman to slap him in the face. "Tell me the answer." Cinderella exerted her strength instantly, and the ice power began to pierce into Subai's body crazily from all sides. But at the next moment, all the power that had just entered Sudbai's body floated out. Cinderella let go of Sudbai, took a few steps back, squatted down slowly, hugged her knees with both hands and curled up there, her whole face buried. Sudbai, who had just experienced a cool storm, stretched out his hand to gently brush away the ice debris on his clothes. Looking at Cinderella, who was curled up there and looking very weak, Sudbai did not step forward to help or comfort her. Sudbai was too lazy to do something meaningful and unnutritious. He just took a deep breath and waved his hand, and all the raindrops around him were pushed aside, forming an area similar to a vacuum. The combination of a weak and crying girl on a rainy night is too sensational. This time Sudbai did a little spoiler of the fresh atmosphere. You just need to be yourself honestly. There is no need to pretend to be pitiful here. However, judging from your appearance, you should be a flower who has grown up in the environment of the Holy See since childhood, right? Although in terms of strength, it is indeed very strong. Listening to Sudbai's ridicule, Cinderella raised her head, looked at Sudbai, took a deep breath, but did not refute, just asked. So you all think I'm stupid? It's very cute, that's all I can say. Sudbai stretched out his hand and patted the battlement. Everyone is burdened with their own helplessness. You are actually quite happy. Sudbai hesitated for a moment and did not say this, foolish people are blessed by fools. But in fact, compared to herself, Cinderella is indeed happy. She must have grown up in the Holy See since she was a child. She has shown extremely high spiritual talents since she was a child and was focused on cultivating her. She lived in an era when the Holy See was at its peak. There is no need for her to throw her life and blood to fight against the dark camp. And in the end, the Pope chose to protect her and let her survive. From her childhood to now, she has been happy. Even though she is very strong, she has always maintained her innocence. A strong and innocent woman. But what about me? Sudbai couldn't help but think of himself, his childhood, his present, and his son. Actually, I knew when I came here that I wouldn't get any answers from you. Cinderella turned her head upward, looking at the raindrops being blocked in the air, and said sadly, I want to get wet. Stop being so childish. Thank you, Lord, it is your death and your resurrection that allow us to be reborn. It is the precious blood shed on your cross that covers all our sins. It enables us to escape Satan's accusations of all our transgressions. Jehovah, the Holy Father God, will no longer punish us according to our transgressions, so that we can gather together with joy and praise in front of the glorious throne of the Father. All flesh will praise you. Cinderella began to devoutly praise the great Lord. Perhaps for her now, only the Lord was the only support she could get. When no one told her the truth, when she felt that she was fooled by everyone, she can think that only the Supreme Lord is her true destination and the harbor where her soul can rest. The prayer of praise fell like an invisible irony in Sudbai's ears. For the first time, Sudbai felt that Cinderella was a girl. A poor, Philistine girl shopping for clothes. In the story of Cinderella, there is a vicious stepmother and two jealous and mean sisters around her. When Cinderella, who got the glass slipper, attended the banquet and fell in love with the prince at first sight, her two sisters fell in love with her stepmother. She did not hesitate to cut off the flesh of her own feet with a knife to pretend to be Cinderella to marry the prince, but in the end, a crow gave 2 consecutive warnings, which prevented the two sisters from succeeding. Finally, Cinderella put on the glass slipper and the prince recognized each other and lived a happy life. In the story, the glass slipper dropped by an unknown entity reminded Cinderella several times. In the end, Cinderella and the prince lived a happy life. The stepmother and two sisters bled and were left with disabilities. It seems that he should be nailed to the pillar of shame and be cursed by future generations who read this story. That invisible hand, the hand that stirred the entire story. Even if the two sisters cut off their feet to replace them, they failed due to the intervention of that hand. It was that hand that directly pushed Cinderella to the prince's bedside. Let this story become beautiful and happy in the eyes of most people. The good guys got a good ending, and the bad guys got their own punishment, and in the end they were all in vain. But actually think about it from another angle, since that hand can give Cinderella a glass slipper, why can't it directly tell the prince Cinderella's identity? In this case, why do the two sisters need to try? If you directly tell the prince who Cinderella is, there will be no story. When he thought about this, Subai suddenly felt very funny. The Cinderella in front of him was protected by the Pope, and was deliberately kept by the Pope for the broadcast to enhance the story in the future. She has been following the Lord's teachings and has never abandoned the Lord. But now, she is still like a puppet on strings, and the saddest thing is that everyone hopes that she will continue to be this puppet, whether it is broadcasting or the Holy See. Snapped. In the northern sky, a meteor suddenly appeared, followed by a burning cloud. This was at night, and this scene seemed incredible. Subai was stunned for a moment, turned around, and bowed deeply to the north. He knew that that person had been burned. No matter what, the person who just passed away deserves to be respected, and all of this comes from the heart. A ray of white light enveloped Subai. It was time to leave. Cinderella seemed to be unable to see the white light and Subai, who was about to disappear, and was still praying there. Subai pursed her lips and wanted to say something but didn't know how to say it. At last, before the figure disappears completely, only a sigh was left. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 798. This time, Subai returned to the story world of Cinderella. He originally wanted to see if he could contact the person in the Vatican prison, and have some food and drinks to relieve his boredom in this boring place of enlightenment. For Subai, Bai Lai said that this return has achieved both goals, but for the story world of Cinderella, it seems that the first half has been continued, especially Cinderella's prayer at the end, which seems to be ironic. It seems to be foreshadowing something. Subai, who was lying in the coffin, did not rush out to show off to the man in the bronze mirror what he had just eaten and drank. He just lay quietly and closed his eyes. It was like sleeping but not like sleeping. The whole person was half asleep and half awake. It took about 2 days for Subai to completely pull himself out of the atmosphere of the story world of Cinderella. The Pope's words, Cinderella's cries, and the vampire's roar in the firelight deep in his memory. Subai's temperament has always been very tough. Even the monks felt inferior to him. But even Subai, in the world of the previous story, still a little distracted. He was just a bystander, just like sitting in his seat watching a movie, but his emotions were indeed brought into it by the plot and characters of the movie. After lying down for a long time, he wanted to move around. Although the place of enlightenment was only such a big place, Subai had not yet reached the state of a living fossil similar to Su Fuegui, who could lie there for many years without coming out. Pushing open the coffin lid, a familiar voice was heard. Looks like I'm having a good time back in the story world. This was the voice of the guy opposite. Subai was about to reply, but suddenly he was stunned for a moment and turned his head to confirm. The guardian of the Western Enlightenment place was actually standing next to his coffin. Hills is wearing a black evening dress, but his slightly pale face exudes a classical melancholy masculine atmosphere. In both Eastern and Western aesthetics, there is actually a place for this kind of melancholy handsome man, such as the ancient Oriental literary men, even in the winter, like to fan themselves and stand on the bridge in the wind. It would be even better if they could cough up blood after coughing. In Western history, such melancholic handsome men are often the cutest among the upper-class ladies. The other party just looked at Subai with a smile on his face. This smile was clearly saying, "How is it, are you surprised? Surprised or not?" Subai resisted the urge to go up and jerk her. Instead, he slowly sat up from the coffin and asked calmly, "How did you get here?" Actually, these two places are originally connected. Hills pointed at the 12 coffins and said, "This is actually a formation. During your absence, I focused on studying it, and then I just tried to activate it once and was teleported over." Haha, the broadcast is so kind. In the past, it could only be through video, but now it can actually interact with real people. Subai walked out of the coffin. He didn't know what to say, but this Westerner was indeed too mysterious. Although the two of them they had shared things with each other before, but even Subai himself had to admit that the other party was much better than him in terms of strength and attainments in various aspects of strengthening and application. And there is a big difference between this guy and me. I have spent a lot of time here, but apart from spending some time thinking about the things that can be used to pass the time in the funerary objects, I have done nothing about this place of enlightenment. Too much investigation and research, but this guy first opened up the bronze mirror from the beginning, and now he actually figured out the formation and transmitted it from the place of enlightenment in the West. Subai rarely has feelings similar to admiration for a person. Even the monk and Fatty Gyatso are absolutely outstanding, but Subai thinks that he is not inferior compared to them, and he is also the earliest among them. Being promoted to a senior audience member was already a kind of proof. Facing this Westerner, Subai really felt like an outstanding student facing a super academic. Even regardless of the level of talent, the other party's exploration and discovery of the place of enlightenment after entering it has already demonstrated his subjective initiative, and he can also understand it through his own original display of bloodlines. He has already learned 70% to 80% of the true meaning of the bleeding line. Even during the time he left, he is very likely to have completely mastered the bleeding line. This guy is really terrifying. Subai didn't have such a strong feeling before. After all, the two parties were communicating through a bronze mirror at that time. In essence, it was a matter of well and good, but now when the other party appears in front of him so straightforwardly, the pressure belongs to the other party. Only then did it really fall on Subai. The principle of the formation is actually very simple. Even if you don't understand the formation, you can still find out the clues by lying here for a while or spending more time to understand the movement trajectory. Hills was quite satisfied with his discovery. He didn't take it seriously. When he tentatively opened the bronze mirror a month ago, he was actually wondering if there was anything further. Now it's just that my guess has been confirmed by myself. If you don't take me to look around, I will take you to my place. Hills looked very casual. The atmosphere and feeling is really like that of brother units visiting each other in the 1980s. Subai nodded. Although he was instinctively wary of the man next to him, he was not timid. Moreover, seeing the man's calm and relaxed appearance, he had already become wary of him. Comparing this comparison, it was really him. Too much disadvantage. When the two of them walked to the altar together, Subai finally calmed down. Regardless of what the other party was thinking, the soldiers came to cover up the water and earth, and the good fortune lying on the steps of the altar were also given. Subai's big message was that these two cats had strength comparable to that of a junior high-level listener. Coupled with himself, even if they faced this intermediate-level senior listener, they would not be without a fight. Very good. Hills was indeed admiring. Although the two places of enlightenment in the East and the West are actually very boring, Easterners undoubtedly spend much more thought on tombs than Westerners, so in Hills it seemed that the place where Subai lived was much more exquisite than his own. Naturally, Hills saw the two cats, which made Hills even more envious. There were only ice lumps there, but Subai could actually keep pets here. When I climbed up the stairs and reached the highest point of the altar, the underworld in front of me was completely displayed in front of my eyes. The underworld was gushing water, and countless corpses and souls were howling and roaring in it. The sound was so loud that it was like an iron horse galloping down. Hill's envy was almost completely displayed on his face. He said to Subai straightforwardly, "Your place is much better than my place. I will take you to see it later. In addition to the ice sculptures, there are the ice sculpture makes no sound at all, but here you have pets, flowing river water, and so many dead souls to accompany you, you really are not lonely." Subai was stunned for a moment, thinking that this guy's thoughts were really a little naive. He couldn't tell when communicating through a bronze mirror before, but now when communicating face to face, he felt that the other person was someone who would show his thoughts on his face without any pretense. "Don't be shy, just say whatever is on your mind." Thinking back to the previous scene of him showing off to himself while eating the last bucket of instant noodles, Subai couldn't help but smile. However, Subai did not completely relax his vigilance. The most obvious example is the monk. He usually looks like an eminent monk who has arrived, but he has no hesitation in digging holes for others. Moreover, are there really any pure and innocent people in the audience? Hills stretched out his hand to touch the jade seal of the Dian kingdom, but a green light flashed out. Hills hesitated for a moment, and then retracted his hand. He was not the guardian of the Eastern Land, so naturally he could not use the magic from the Eastern Land of Enlightenment. "Keepsake. Friend, can you use this thing?" Hills looked at Subai and asked. Subai shook his head, "You can only pick it up and look at it, you can't use it." There is no need to lie about this kind of thing, because Subai believes that the place of enlightenment in the West must have a token similar to the jade seal of the Dian kingdom. This guy should only be able to pick it up and play with it but not use it. Of course, the token has the ability to automatically suppress the underworld. Function: this is not controlled by Subai. "I feel like you haven't been in this place of enlightenment for long, right?" Hills asked. "I'm fully prepared, it'll be less than a month. If you add in the time you just entered the story world, it'll be just 1 month," Subai replied. "1 month, I'm a little longer than you, just 1.5 months," Hills said. "You don't seem to be in a hurry at all." "What should I be anxious about?" Subai asked. "It seems that you really don't know that the guardians of the Enlightenment place are usually replaced once a year. For longer ones, it takes less than 2 years. New people come in every time, but the old ones don't know whether they are alive or dead," Hills said. Subai frowned. "The guardian of the Western Enlightenment land is updated so frequently? What does it mean to not know life or death? Even if you leave here by train, there will be no news at all. Then, it is very likely that you will die. So I feel that my time is very urgent. I did not completely indulge in understanding the tombstone, but spent more time exploring the secrets of the place of enlightenment. Now, I have found a way to come to you, but I still haven't been able to find the reason why the previous guardians of the West disappeared." Hills looked at Subai and asked without much hope, "Have you discovered anything?" Subai licked his lips. "The guardians of the Western land of enlightenment died generation after generation, but the guardian of the Eastern place of enlightenment, Su Fugui, lay here for 20 years. A kind of speculation rose in Subai's heart. Since Hills was able to discover the secrets of the bronze mirror and the teleportation formation, then the guardians of the Western Enlightenment place throughout the ages could have found it even if they spent a little more time, right? So, that is. At this time, out of the corner of Subai's eye, he saw Ruyi standing up slowly from the steps. Its eyes were staring at Hills with a bloodthirsty look, and with an extremely obvious eagerness to try. It seems that, for this situation. Very familiar. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 799. This cat. Hills pointed at Ruyi. "From the moment I first came in, I could feel that it had a ray of energy attached to me, even though it had been hiding its intentions towards me. Meaning, but I can still feel it. Because of my demon clan blood, I am most sensitive to the demon clan's energy. Now, judging from its meaning, it wants to kill me. Moreover, it seems that this is not the first time for it to do such a thing. According to you Chinese people, it is somewhat familiar. Subai didn't know how to say it, nor how to explain it. Could it be that, oh, what a coincidence, those past guardians in the West killed the cat out of curiosity? They had nothing to do to tinker with formations and came here. What are you doing? Su Fuegui came and slaughtered them one by one. I guess everyone has followed Su Fuegui to kill the Western guardians. He has gained experience and habits. Seeing you, Hills, it will immediately be unable to restrain itself from sharpening its claws. Jixiang was originally prostrate beside Ruyi, but now looking at Ruyi's appearance, Jixiang glanced at Subai and Hills with some confusion, but no matter what, even though he didn't know what was going on, Jixiang still stood up and aimed his body at 11 shires. At this time, Jixiang still chooses to stand with Ruyi. This is a matter of course. Unless Jixiang's brain suddenly goes crazy and he runs to stand with shires, he shishis is not like Su Yuhang. The ability to coax cats. My friend, can you tell me what kind of person your last Eastern Guardian was? Obviously, Hills has tasted something. Ruyi has been living in the Eastern Enlightenment land. It's not like Jixiang has been out there for 20 years. Therefore, Ruyi's aura is almost the same as this enlightenment place. It is integrated into one. Since this black cat shows this attitude, Hills can naturally think of the endings of previous guardians. But there's one thing that Hills can't figure out. How little do the previous guardians of the Western Enlightenment land do to him? Every time they come to the Eastern Enlightenment land, are they the losers? This is absolutely impossible. Even if the guardians of the East and the West PK each generation, it is impossible for the guardians of the Western Enlightenment land to have zero results so far. My last guardian, named Su Fuegui, has been lying here for 20 years. At this point, Subai had no intention of hiding it. After Ruyi made this gesture and made the matter completely clear, from Subai's point of view, he had no other choice. Of course, if Hills is willing to leave and return to his place of enlightenment in the West, it is really hard to say whether Subai will stop him, but it depends on Ruyi's mood. If Ruyi insists on taking action against Hills, Subai can't just die without saving Rujian. In the past, Subai got sick and forced others into his chariot, but this time, the black cat suddenly went crazy, and Subai became the one who was tied to the chariot. 20 years. Hills sighed. This is not surprising. A guardian who has been lying here for 20 years. If the first batch of Western guardians from the same era 20 years ago still have some chance of winning. As for him, the guardian of the Western Enlightenment land, who will be regarded as a descendant in the future, is really just a gift. Among the audience, 5 years is an era, 10 years is just based on rumors, and more than 20 years, there are really only a few legends left. Taking a deep breath, Hill suddenly felt that he was so nervous. He never objected to being nervous because he saw things very clearly and he naturally saw himself more clearly. Friends, do we have to decide whether we live or die here? Hills looked at Subai and asked, that black cat obviously doesn't want me to leave, but if I face it alone, I will kill you. Although the cat meat is a bit sour, it is considered a very good food here. Subai didn't respond, just stood here silently. Hills understood Subai's attitude and smiled, I don't know if it's just my luck. When it was my generation's turn, the guardian of the Eastern land of enlightenment actually changed. But it's you who deserve to lose. Subai spoke at this time, I don't know why my former guardian wanted to kill all the past guardians of the West, and I don't understand why all the past guardians of the West before you, including you, are like he is a curious baby who likes to find ways to get here. But if it is really a traditional repertoire of the Eastern and Western places of enlightenment, I feel that I should have the responsibility to inherit this tradition, let alone carry it forward, at least not to lose my virginity here. My thoughts are the same as yours. Hills nodded, I also think that the record here should be broken, because there is no reason for us in the West to be beaten by you in the East on this matter. It has been suppressed for 20 years. Next moment, the auras of Hills and Sudbai burst out almost at the same time. The auras of both sides were intertwined, collided, and torn apart. The junction of the areas where the two stood actually formed a kind of visual distortion. At this time, Hills took the initiative to take a step forward and struck out with a Tai Chi push hand. A Westerner, a blonde guy with blue eyes, not only practiced Eastern swordsmanship, this attack actually used Eastern traditional Tai Chi moves. Sudbai raised his fist and took the initiative to fight. The moment when fists and palms collide, the same bloodline appeared on Sudbai's fist and the back of Hill's palm. The power of the two fists was instantly expanded 3 times at this time. For a moment, a terrible strong wind swept from the altar. Even Jixiang and Ruyi below could not bear to take the initiative to go up at this time. After a while, Sudbai felt that the force on his fist was being neutralized by the opponent. At the same time, the opponent seemed to be using his own strength to fight. While his own strength was weakening, the opponent's strength was suddenly increasing. From the current perspective, Sudbai was at a disadvantage in this duel. The opponent was indeed much smarter than him in the selection and use of moves. But Sudbai took the initiative to take a step forward at this time, his fists continued to exert force, and his chests actively collided with each other. In battle, it is the simplest principle to use one's own strengths to attack the enemy's weaknesses. Boom! The bodies of both sides began to collide at this time. In the end, Sudbai staggered back 3 steps, and Hills also took 3 steps back. However, Hills looked more calm, while his face showed a hint of solemnity. What Sudbai is best at is his physical body. Especially after the turn of the ancient zombies, Sudbai's physical body has climbed to a higher level. Even though he is only the beginning of the advanced audience, this body is definitely not the beginning of the advanced audience. The level that can be possessed, but even so, the two sides still fought hard physically to a 50-50 level. But Hills is a magician and a martial artist, plus he has a hidden demon bloodline. The opponent's advantage is already obvious. Hills smiled slightly, spread out his hands, and 2 long swords appeared in his hands. When he flipped his wrists, the long swords flew into the air with gorgeous sword flowers. He was like an elegant swordsman. While showing his absolute confidence, he also showed a kind of respect for Sudbai. Sudbai also had a smile on his lips. He first stretched out his hand to the 2 black cats over there to signal not to come up to join the battle group. For Sudbai, if the previous fight was put aside, what was happening in front of him was one seen as the most difficult and most suitable enemy for me in the same realm that I encountered when I was promoted to a senior audience. The other party was good enough, even so good that Sudbai, a person who also opened a grocery store to strengthen, felt very pressured. However, such an opponent, plus both sides have the status of guardians of the eastern and western places of enlightenment. So Sudbai is more willing to simply use his own strength to compete with the opponent. Aha! Hill's figure disappeared from the spot, but the 2 swords remained in place, the swords trembling and making a crisp sound. In an instant, the 2 swords also turned into phantoms and disappeared. Immediately afterwards, Hills appeared behind Sudbai, and the 2 swords appeared in his hands. The whole action is overwhelming. Plop! A large piece of flesh was cut off from Sudbai's knees, and the muscles and bones were also severed. He knelt down heavily. This is a very straightforward offensive. It is infinitely close to killing the enemy with one move. It also has excellent viewing effects and association space. It guarantees one's fast, cool and handsome while injuring the opponent with great intensity. However, Sudbai, who was kneeling on the ground, did not show the slightest hint of anger. Even if the other party used this method to defeat and humiliate himself, Sudbai put his hands on the ground, like a defeated person, a person without any temper. The defeated Hills, who appeared behind Subai with swords in both hands, did not make the slightest move. He did not sheath his sword or launch the next round of offensive against Subai. Slowly, Subai, who was kneeling on the ground, slowly raised his head. Subai's eyes were red, but it was not caused by anger or humiliation. It was a kind of emptiness, as if at this moment, Subai's consciousness had already transcended his own. His body had already drifted in another direction. Immediately afterwards, Subai gritted his teeth and roared with a cruel smile. "I asked you to pretend to be cool." Ho! Roar! Roar! 3 roars came from the altar. Where Ushires was standing at the beginning, a phantom appeared with his whole body bound by chains. The phantom tore and roared angrily. In front of the phantom, there was a relatively pale soul. It is the soul of Hills, who is painfully resisting the entanglement from the vampire shadow. Hills injured Subai's body, but Subai captured Hills' soul at the same moment. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 800. Hills' soul rose up and released a thick dark golden mist, and 9 snake heads sprang out. 2 of the snake heads exploded directly. The shadow summoned by Subai was bounced away for a certain distance, and lost control of Hills. Under the control of the soul, Hills' soul instantly floated up, and his body returned at this time to welcome the soul's return. After landing, Hills' already pale face became even paler at this time, and his body was shaking a little, which was a sign of the trauma to his soul. Ah! Subai's legs suddenly exerted force, and he stood up, but he still swayed. The 2 swords of Hills not only cut off the muscles and bones of Subai's knees, but also the extremely sharp sword energy left behind them. It continued to wreak havoc in that position, and therefore, even if Subai had a powerful physical body and the blessing of the bloodline, it was still extremely difficult to recover. Although he stood up forcefully, his knee was still seriously injured, which severely restricted Subai to a certain extent. After all, if he lost his knee, it would be difficult for Subai to increase his speed. "I was careless." Hills breathed out gently, stretched out his swords, and looked at Subai indifferently. "I'm sorry, if I used the most orthodox fighting style, I wouldn't have given you the slightest chance." "Don't make excuses if you don't pretend." Subai stretched out his hand to wipe the blood on the corner of his mouth and looked at Hills with a joking expression. "This will make people look down on." After hearing this, Hills seemed to think about it seriously, and seemed to think that what Subai said was indeed reasonable. He nodded and said, "I have learned a lesson." Immediately, Hills attacked again. He couldn't give Subai too much time to repair the injury, because Subai's body was damaged, and his soul was damaged. Subai's recovery speed was naturally much faster than his. Condensation. In front of Subai, 7 ice walls appeared. This was the defense that Subai had set up. When Hills stopped attacking in a pretentious and coercive way, Subai had to use the most orthodox way to deal with it. "You come and I go, you attack and I defend." Snapped. A series of crisp sounds came, and 6 of the 7 ice walls arranged by Subai were instantly broken by Hills. As for the 7th one, Hills did not choose to break it. He turned around directly, exerted force on his waist, and raised his swords in the air. He waved out 1 or 2 bolts of lightning, and then all of them stabbed behind him. Puff. I don't know when, Subai actually appeared behind Hills, but Hills, who had seen through all this and thrust out his swords, was not excited at all. Subai in front of him even withstood his own blows. The sword penetrated, but he actually grabbed the edge of the sword with both hands. At this moment, the sharp sword energy released from the 2 swords was frantically attacking Subai in front of him. Snapped. The 7th and final ice wall shattered, and Subai inside rushed over directly. Subai rushed out with a smile on his face, seemingly mocking Hills, who had fallen into the trap. Hills was stunned for a moment. At this time, he could only be shocked that Subai was able to cultivate the clone to the point where it could withstand damage. How on earth did he do it? You must know that at the beginning, he didn't even know how the clone had attack power. Maybe it's because of the bloodline? When Subai was getting closer and closer, but the clone was still holding the swords tightly with his own body, Hills didn't look too panicked. Instead, he loosened his hands and gave up the swords directly. Then, from the center of his eyebrows, a dark moon totem mark appeared at the position, and a dark gray barrier appeared in front of him. At the same time, Hills spread his hands forward, and the dark moon totem between his eyebrows spread directly, turning into a powerful shattering weapon. The impact energy of the ability was shot directly at the charging Subai. Boom! Subai's body met the light of the dark moon. Immediately afterwards, Subai's body shattered directly, so naturally, so simply, so unexpectedly. Hill's eyes froze for a moment, and he subconsciously wanted to turn around. Damn! The one who just stupidly grabbed his sword with both hands was not a clone. Are you surprised or surprised? Subai's voice came from behind Hills. At this time, Hill's defensive light shield was in front, and his body was also carrying Subai on his back. Whoa! Whoa! The two swords originally inserted into Subai's body were pulled out by Subai. Blood spattered and the sword blades were inserted into Hill's arms by Subai. Puff! The sword is a good sword. Even though Hills was a dual practitioner of both magic and martial arts, his physical fitness was extremely strong. Therefore, Subai was not arrogant enough to kill Hills directly with this counter-logical sneak attack. The swords in his bloody hands did not cut across Hills's body, but pierced both the sword blades into Hill's arms. Hills's arms were pierced in an instant, and at this moment, Hills, who had already reacted, turned around and kicked Subai hard in the chest. Subai only felt that his body was violently smashed out by a mountain. It was estimated that few bones in his upper body were intact, but at this moment, Subai's courage was displayed, because just now, he was stabbing with two swords. When entering Hills's arms, his hands were still holding the swords tightly. When Hills kicked him, Subai actually had no defense at that moment, and he used the force to move backwards. Jump back. This is a manifestation of actively withdrawing all defenses to allow the opponent to attack. This is also a choice to cause maximum damage to the opponent. Hiss. At the same time that Subai was kicked out, the two swords were driven with huge potential energy, and Hills also let out a muffled groan, and his arms were cut off abruptly at this time. The two arms spun around in the air for a few times and then landed on the ground. Subai was kicked off the altar and hit the steps heavily. There was a large and clear dent in his chest. This was a real got smashed. At the end of this round of fighting between the two sides, Hills looked at Subai in disbelief. He was not shocked that his arms were cut off, but was shocked that Subai had chosen the strategy from the beginning to fight several times in a row. Zhang Subaiwei was so fearless and courageous in executing this strategy without hesitation. Being cruel to others is not really cruel. A truly cruel person must first be cruel to himself, and the Oriental man in front of him has indeed done that. He clearly had the absolute advantage in terms of apparent strength, but after several fights, he never gained any advantage at all. The opponent was repulsed by him every time, which was very embarrassing, but he was always able to take a bite out of him. Huge chunks of bloody flesh. This is killing 1,000 enemies and damaging himself by 800, but this is not the result that Hills wants. He feels that he can easily defeat Subai without the two cats taking action, plus Gendeo in this limited space, Subai had nowhere to escape. If he defeated him, he would be able to kill him. However, the two black cats were originally regarded as the only variables by Hills, but now the two black cats did obey the Oriental man's order and did not take action, and variables have already arisen. Hills, who had lost his arms, stood at the top of the altar like a human stick. He did not have a vampire bloodline. Although his life level was very high, he could not recover quickly like a vampire as long as there was energy in his blood. Body, and therefore, the injuries Subai caused to him were real. Coupled with the fact that Hills has a thin figure and loses the support of his arms, he looks even more embarrassed and miserable, a bit like a disabled artist who performs on a runway. Puff. Subai coughed and spit out a big mouthful of his own organs and minced meat. He wanted to stand up, but it was difficult for him to stand up. He could only try his best to raise his head and look at Hill, who was standing on the top. Sri Lanka. Cool. It's really cool. This is the thrill of battle, and facing an opponent whose strength is higher than his own, he can still achieve a 50-50 result. Subai is indeed worthy of happiness and pleasure. Jixiang Ruyi slowly began to step forward at this time. Apparently they felt that it was time to take action themselves, but Subai gave a sharp shout. Don't move, I'm not dead yet. This is not because Subai is pedantic, but because this kind of fighting opportunity is indeed rare, especially in the face of extreme pressure. The thinking and sparks between life and death are often a kind of wealth that can be encountered but cannot be sought. Ji Xiangruyi looked at each other, and glanced at Subai with a retarded look, but still stepped back. Since this retarded man wants to show off, let him continue. According to the temperament of the two black cats, they will not shout like in Qian Yao's drama. No, no, I don't want you to die, I want you to live. No, no, let me do it, let me do it. Hills, who had lost his arms, did not stop completely at this time, because the battle was not over yet. His lips kept moving, and obscure notes came out of his mouth. Then, a black door appeared next to Ushire's. The door was full of ghosts, as if it was connected to the Hades palace. Please accept my call, messenger from hell. A huge hand stretched out from the door, as if penetrating through infinite space. The palm of this hand was as big as two people. The broad palm was burning with the ghost fire from hell, which seemed to be mixed with the screams of the dead souls. At this time, it grabbed Subai directly. This was when both men were disabled, and Hills began to use magic to summon helpers to come out to fight. Haha. Subai, whose gums were full of blood stains, laughed at this moment. Come on, I tell you not to pretend, I force you to pretend, it's better than a summons, come on. You who were executed from the Forum of Judgment in the Vatican. Here I offer my remaining essence and blood as a sacrifice. Summon your souls back. Reshape your body with my blood. Let your rage and roar reappear in the world. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 801. Subai's summons was spoken very powerfully, with a sense of confidence, unruly and indomitable. Whether it was his expression or tone, he was absolutely sure. Hills, who was standing at the highest point of the altar, was stunned for a moment. His consciousness expanded rapidly, fearing that there would be a terrifying existence behind him that Subai would directly summon to attack him. Jixiang and Ruyi also straightened their bodies and expressed obvious interest in the existence that Subai wanted to summon. Even the giant hand that had just stretched out from the door paused for a moment, as if waiting for the summoned existence to fight, temporarily putting aside Subai, its original target. 1 second. 3 seconds. 10 seconds. If there was an animation effect at this time, it must have been a gust of wind blowing by, sweeping up a few leaves, and then 2 crows flew over with AHH, leaving a few lines of embarrassing black lines. After reciting the summons, Subai closed his eyes. It seemed that the quiet time had been too long. He slowly opened his eyes again. The giant hand is still the giant hand, Hills is still Hills, the altar is still the altar, and I am still myself. The remaining blood in his body has not been borrowed. My summoning, well, it failed. Hill's chest rose and fell. He felt insulted because Subai didn't know how to summon. In fact, Hills noticed something was wrong when Subai recited the summons, because there was no one around Subai at that time. The fluctuation of space laws, even if the simplest totem is transformed, will cause the nearby space laws to tremble, but when Subai recited, there was no trace. But Hills, who had been tricked by Subai several times, chose to believe it or not. However, the fact slapped him in the face. The Oriental man in front of him really didn't understand summoning at all. He was just pretending. And he pretended to be very involved, very involved. Ahem. Subai coughed, breaking the 10 seconds of silence. This cough is a bit embarrassing. Sorry, I just remembered that I have never practiced summoning. Subai couldn't help but laugh. In fact, what he had just done was just to buy some time. When this giant hand appeared, Subai knew that it would be difficult for him to resist it now, so he get a preliminary buffer for your body's blood flow and transformation. The paused giant hand no longer paused and grabbed Subai again. However, when the giant hand patted down, Subai's body turned into a pool of blood and splashed out, and it no longer existed at all. Boom! The giant hand slapped on the steps of the altar, and an ear-splitting roar immediately sounded all around. But more than 10 meters away, Subai's blood gathered and recondensed his figure, but Subai's aura was already very weak. Taking a deep breath, Subai knelt down on one knee with one hand on the ground. He had escaped death just now, but what should he do next? It will definitely not work to cheat again. The giant hand swept over again, seemingly determined to grab Subai and drag him into the gate of hell. This was an upright crushing. In front of the absolute physical power, Subai suddenly felt a little small. The most terrible thing was that his current physical condition is really bad. Facing this giant hand, he doesn't even have a chance to fight. Wow! Subai once again dodged the giant hand in embarrassment, but the strong wind and nether flames carried by the giant hand still hit Subai heavily, and swept Subai directly to the edge of the underworld. His back was already burnt black, and there was a trace of it. The curse of corrosion and soul invasion was still causing secondary damage to Subai. The corpses and souls in the underworld had already stayed away from this area when the two guardians of the eastern and western proving grounds fought. The corpses were the embodiment of treachery and sinisterness. Naturally, they would not come out to help Subai fight, let alone not long ago, when Subai turned around, he directly absorbed the souls of countless corpses in the underworld. A leader like this would naturally not be liked and supported by his subordinates. Hill's whole body floated above the altar, like a master coming out of hell. The giant hand came back again, looked at Subai again and grabbed it. All this seemed to be playing a game of eagle and chicken. At this time, Hill stared at Subai on one side, and on the other side began to be wary of that person. Two black cats, now for him, when Subai failed to summon anything to deal with it, the situation was actually very clear. Subai's body had been marked as out, and the rest needed to be taken care of. Yes, it's these two black cats. Facing the giant hand attacking again, Subai simply turned over and jumped into the underworld, and the giant hand also stretched into the underworld. It's useless. Unless there is a tombstone of a big boss who is very close to you here, no matter what happens in the place of enlightenment, it has nothing to do with them, and they will not pity you, because the guardian of the place of enlightenment they are replenishable consumables. If one dies, the broadcaster will immediately arrange for the next one. When he saw Subai hiding in the underworld, Hills showed a contemptuous smile. Once upon a time, the guardians of the West came to the place of enlightenment in the East again and again, but were always beaten by the fierce Dongfang who had been lying here for 20 years. People were slaughtered, and this time, history and so-called traditions will change in front of them. Boom. Not long after, the giant hand grabbed Subai in the underworld and lifted Subai out of the water. Feeling the terrifying squeezing force coming from all directions, Subai struggled to support the fingers of the giant hand with both hands. However, this stalemate was undoubtedly a huge drain on Subai, and the body that had just condensed was at this moment. New cracks appeared one after another, and at the same time, the curses and ghostly flames attached to the giant hands were constantly burning Sudbai's soul. From Sudbai's body, the blood kept turning into blood mist and steaming out, seeming to blend into the giant hand, making the giant hand look slightly more colorful. Seeing Sudbai's painful look, Hills shook his head. To be honest, he didn't want to kill Sudbai. In fact, the reason for the fight between the two people was also ridiculous and ridiculous. In short, it was the Guardian of the West. It is a record created by the curiosity of the reader and the previous generation of Guardians of the East who have been lying there like a bug for 20 years. Hill's body floated up and came to Sudbai, who was still struggling. He looked into Sudbai's eyes and whispered, "You are very good. If you give up now, I will stop. Now, even if those two black cats take action, you will be dead. Moreover, those two black cats can't really hinder me. In this regard, I should know it myself. Hey, I told you, don't pretend, be his." Click, click. With more and more cracks in his body, Sudbai found it difficult to even speak, but his eyes were still staring at Hills with red eyes. There is no point in struggling. In fact, we only need to determine the winner, not life and death. After all, I hope to find someone to show off next time someone brings instant noodles. Hills spoke in a calm tone, which was his usual style, but Sudbai knew clearly that Hills was now pointing fingers at himself, a loser, from the perspective of a winner, using his kindness to paint himself pleasure. At first, old Sutioyu was lying here bored, curious babies came to kill one by one, but Sudbai obviously did not have the confidence and calmness of old Sutioyu, otherwise he would not have almost fallen into a dead end like now. It's better to admit defeat, or die. Hills nodded slightly. He had already said what needed to be said. If Sudbai did not lower his head and admit defeat, then killing him would be the final outcome, even if he would need to be lonely from now on. Bang! 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 Sudbai's body began to explode continuously, and the giant hand continued to shrink. Sudbai was like a sponge, constantly being squeezed out of Yinhong's blood, and the giant hand began to become more and more the redder. Hills shook his head, as if he was mocking Sudbai for his stubbornness. He was just bowing his head and admitting defeat. It was just a boring recording and discussion. There was really no need to be so serious. As an audience, living is of course more important than anything else. Dignity and face are countless times more important. Of course, Hills can stand and speak without hurting his back. He is a proud person, and Sudbai is the same. If the positions of the two parties were reversed, Hills himself would not be willing to bow his head. The blood on Sudbai's body began to evaporate faster and faster, and Sudbai's breath began to become weaker and weaker. In fact, Sudbai's arms were now broken, and only the remains of his body were still being held tightly. But Sudbai still opened his mouth, revealing his bloody gums, and whispered, "I don't know how to summon. You admit defeat, I can teach you in the future, just like I taught you the correct use of clones," Hills said still calmly. Hee hee. Sudbai suddenly laughed, and then looked at Hills as if he were looking at a fool. "This hand, summons, out, it costs a lot. Well, it's not your pet, even, you have to please it, in order to borrow its power. You don't need to worry about this. The price always has to be paid." Hills saw that Sudbai had only the last struggle left. He also knew that Sudbai would not give up, even if it means death. "I don't know how to summon," Sudbai repeated. Hills frowned slightly. He remembered that Subai had already said this. But I will sacrifice. Do you think I just got into the underworld to take a bath? Subai suddenly opened his mouth, stared at Hills with a crazy smile and shouted. I have sacrificed 90% of my blood. Now, it's your turn, to fulfill your promise. I am much more generous than him, right? Hills's pupils shrank instantly, and he suddenly understood why the giant hand he summoned had slowly turned red just now. For a moment, Hills, who had lost both arms, was about to retreat quickly. He was floating before it was too close to Subai, and naturally it was extremely close to this giant hand. Hills knew what he was summoning, and he also knew what the characters of the demons in the underworld were. Moreover, Hills himself could not fully control them. Every time he summoned, he actually had to promise a certain price and go back afterwards. They are willing to take action only after paying compensation. Therefore, the owner of this giant hand is not his pet, partner, or subordinate. On the contrary, Hills, who is still just a high-level listener, wants to borrow his power. You have to please me in every possible way. At the moment, seeing the discolored palm, Hills understood that the owner of this hand had been bought by Subai with a higher price and more direct sacrifice. Subai took the initiative to evaporate his own blood, and was not squeezed out. It was so compressed that it exploded. Subai was still fully capable of turning into liquid blood again to avoid being caught by a giant hand, but he didn't do that. He was caught on purpose and fulfilled the promise of sacrifice in front of him on purpose. Damn! This cunning Oriental! This insidious Oriental! This perfidious devil! The giant hand holding Subai didn't wait for Hills to get far away, and struck directly across the side, hitting the body of Hills, who had lost both arms and was caught off guard with a heavy blow. Boom! Hills flew backwards from the altar, and finally hit the coffin heavily. Due to the impact on his waist, half of Hills' body had been broken, and his whole body hung on the coffin in a miserable manner. His body could not restrain himself and began to slide, twitching. The giant hand completed its promise to Subai, let go, and retracted behind the door, and the door disappeared. This. Hill subconsciously wanted to raise his hand, but found that his body had completely collapsed. Unless he could enter the story world and get repaired by the broadcast, this kind of collapse would be difficult even with the treasures of heaven and earth. After the repair was completed, Hills could no longer do even the current movement of raising his hand. A man whose body was completely deformed by being pinched, and whose legs and feet were also deformed, slowly came to Hills, or it would be more appropriate to say he crawled to Hills. The man's body moved close to Hills, walking upstream, until finally, the two sides were face to face, and the two exhausted men's bodies were almost overlapping. A tragic battle will inevitably end in a tragic victory. Just looking at the current appearance of both sides, one can see how expensive both sides have paid for this confrontation. Hills opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he stuck out half of his tongue. His body was now more seriously damaged than Subai's. No matter how hard he tried, he could only produce a monotonous syllable. Subai stuck out his tongue and licked Hill's blood-stained face. Some blood flowed along his tongue and was brought into his mouth, making Subai's face show a look of satisfaction. However, Subai did not directly swallow Hill's blood to recover from his injuries. He just used force again to bring his mouth closer to Hill's ears. Because Subai doesn't have much energy to speak now. Blinking twice means admitting defeat, otherwise I will suck your blood and make you my nourishment. With the same choice, Subai returned it to Hills. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 802. Beside the yellow spring, a black cat is pacing. Although Jixiang and Ruyi look very similar, they can actually be seen at a glance. There is a big difference between Ruyi's coldness and Jixiang's aloofness. Ruyi was not in a good mood. The reason was that Subai wanted to maintain this tradition, while Hills wanted to break this tradition. For Ruyi, standing on the side of it was a tradition for Su Fuegui to beat the visiting Westerners to death. But Subai didn't do this. He had obviously won, but he left the Westerners' life behind. This made Ruyi very uncomfortable. A cat, no matter how powerful it is just a cat after all. Do you want a cat? It is not realistic for a cat to look away in any way, and the scope of Ruyi's life is only this small place of enlightenment. If it looks away from this, where can you let it look at? Jixiang was prostrate on the top table of the altar, pressing a paw on the box containing the Dian Kingdom's jade seal, staring feebly at Ruyi, who was pacing back and forth by the underworld below. For Jixiang, it doesn't matter anyway, and because of this, he can't understand his former partner. 20 years of different lives are indeed very different for the two cats. Ruyi is still there to get into trouble, while Jixiang is helping to watch from the side. On the other side, on both sides of the coffin lid, two men with twisted bodies were lying there. Subai's face was pale and his expression was extremely depressed, as if he had overindulged. Indeed, Subai is indeed very weak now. It is a blessing that his realm has not been lost. For him, he must wait until the next time he enters the story world to recover. In the place of enlightenment, if he wants to recover it is very difficult, because the energy lost this time cannot be restored simply through self-recovery. Of course, Subai actually has another choice, which is to suck the half-dead Hills next to him, who is in worse condition than himself, as blood food. However, even if Hills showed off before, but he after all, it was the words floating in front of me that told me that I would not kill you as long as you admit defeat. Now on his own side, it seems a bit unkind to directly suck others into adultery. Unkind, this idea would not have appeared in Subai's mind originally, but he had to consider the actual situation in everything. There were only two people in the two places of enlightenment. If he killed one of them, he would be the only one in the future. The other one is just too lonely. Moreover, there is really no deep hatred between the two parties. It was purely Su Fuegui's fault here. If Su Fuegui hadn't been lying there like a butcher for 20 years, he would kill a curious baby from the west without doing anything. Subai didn't believe the situation before. After the previous Western Guardians came here, they were all obsessed with challenging the Guardians of the Eastern Enlightenment land. They were all passionate about fighting. Madman! You should kill me. Hill's waist has been twisted. Even when he is leaning on the coffin lid, half of his body is facing in and the other half is facing out. For people at their level of life, even with this kind of injury, they can still breathe. Immortal, coupled with the fact that Hills is both a magician and a martial artist and has the hidden bloodline of the demon clan, his ability to withstand damage is not much weaker than that of Subai. I won't repeat what you told me before. I feel so tired even talking now. Subai tilted his head, and his words were indeed a little weak. Besides, since you have given up, I have no reason to kill you. You pressed my eyelids with your hands and pressed them twice. I didn't. Don't explain, explanation is just a cover-up. Subai interrupted Hills. Can't we just lie here quietly with our eyes closed and wait for the story world time to come? Aren't you afraid that I will enter the story world earlier than you and then recover and attack you? Hills asked bitterly. You are so cute, how could you do this? Subai said with a smile. Hills kept savoring the word lovely in her mind to describe what it meant. By the way, is your hidden bloodline the Yamata no Orakai? Is it the Japanese mythical totem? You have good knowledge, Hills praised. Haha, you're pretending again. Subai changed the direction of his head, found a more comfortable position, and said, the cultural atmospheres of the eastern countries of China, Japan, and South Korea are still very similar. I know this. I have also been in contact with some Japanese and Korean listeners, and I found that they are very pure. Yes, it's very pure. They treat their bloodline and enhancement as a kind of life and an attitude towards life. Our Chinese audience is more interested and more realistic. Of course, this it's also because the competition in the audience circles in Japan and South Korea is not as fierce as mine. Their attitude towards bloodline and enhancement can often achieve very good results when we are at our current level, but if it is like this from the beginning, it will be too early, which will make them more advanced listeners. It currently lacks sufficient competitiveness and viability. Hills looked at Subai, and then at the two black cats who had just returned from a walk. His eyes especially stayed on Ruyi for a while. I think I'd better go back there first. Hills said to Subai that he felt more at ease with Subai. After all, he had not tasted the deeper meaning of lovely and had no bad associations. However, Hills was indeed a little cautious about this black cat. In the past, when I was at my peak, I could be confident and calm, but now that I am like this, looking at this black cat that looks like a professional butcher, I feel very uncomfortable. And through a period of observation, Hills also saw that Subai could not completely control the black cat. If the black cat suddenly took action now, even if he and Subai were united, it would not be the black cat. Opponent. I'm sorry. Subai smiled. I don't mind if you can mobilize the magic circle to teleport back now, but I can't help you. You can't let me crawl on the ground to help you push the coffin. Bar. Hill sighed and could only close his eyes and try not to look at the black cat. Fortunately, even if Ruyi felt unhappy, she still gave Subai face and did not take action against Hills. However, every time she felt unhappy, she would always come to see Hills up close several times a day. Perhaps this is the only thing Ruyi can do now. I can't kill you, but I can at least scare you. 5 days passed like this. During these 5 days, Subai's injuries recovered a little. At least, he was able to stand up a little while holding onto the wall of the coffin, while Hill's soul recovered a little. The spirit is better than before, but 5 days is far from enough time to recover. Two men had a fight over a flimsy and meaningless record, and now they are still two seriously ill people. I have to say that this is indeed a kind of irony. But on this day, when the two people were still leaning on the coffin lid and chatting feebly, a white light suddenly bloomed at the entrance of the Enlightenment Place, and then, the entire Enlightenment Place began to tremble slightly. Hills's face hardened and he said, "It should be someone from the East who comes to prove the truth." Subai smiled bitterly, "I just hope that no more senior people will get in again. It shouldn't be possible." After all, there was no response there. It can only be that when someone on one side is demonstrating, it will have an impact on the entrance formation on the other side, giving people who are not here to demonstrate a chance to enter. Subai stretched out his hand and patted the coffin lid. The coffin lid floated in response, and the white light outside became brighter and brighter, which meant that the person who came to preach was about to come in. Subai tried several times, but now his body could not be turned into the coffin at all. After all, the specifications of this coffin were indeed relatively high, and the height and width were also made according to the treatment of emperors and generals. "Jixiang, help me!" Subai shouted to Jixiang behind him. Jixiang came over, stretched out his paws, and a force lifted Subaichuo up and sent him into the coffin. "Jixiang, come in with me," Subai shouted again. Jixiang felt melancholy, but still jumped into the coffin, and then the coffin lid closed. Hills, who was leaning there, couldn't help but taunted, "Chinese people are so vain and so proud of themselves." At this time, a slender woman walked out of the white light. She had an oval face and a thin waist. She had a natural charm. It can be said to be a natural type of flattery. This may be due to her innate nature and its strengthening root. It doesn't matter much. The woman looked at this place while walking. For most of the audience, the place of enlightenment is indeed not a place that they want to come to. Therefore, when most of the enlighteners come to enlightenment, it is the first time they have seen it. This place is the place of enlightenment. As the woman approaches, the coffin lid floated, and a layer of black mist rose up. Jixiang raised his paws and helped Subai up, but Subai was still hidden in the black mist. Jixiang walked out and appeared in front of the woman, acting reluctantly as Subai's guardian sacred beast. The woman looked at Jixiang, squatted down slightly, and said to Subai in the dark mist, "This cat is so cute." With the strength of a woman's enlightenment, she is indeed qualified to say lovely to Jixiang. But at the same time, the woman's spiritual consciousness also swept through Subai in the black mist. Naturally, this layer of black mist could not block the spiritual consciousness of an enlightened person. However, what he saw was a man whose physical activity was almost at a low point and his whole body was twisted and mutilated. When he thought about the man's identity lying in the coffin, the woman subconsciously thought that Subai was a strong man who was guarding the place of enlightenment and was practicing. It is a kind of cultivation method that puts people to death and survives. At the moment, the woman bowed slightly to Subai very solemnly as a salute. Hypocritical, hypocritical, so hypocritical. Hills, who was leaning behind the coffin, kept cursing in his heart.